Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts hates fencing. He just wants to run free. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. I'm a fan of fencing. I'm a fan of all Olympic sports. But Gregg Rosenthal, my guest today, is too locked into the NFL to pay attention to the Olympics because he is now hosting a daily NFL podcast, NFL Daily, but he has taken time from his busy schedule to join me today to preview the AFC West. Gregg, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, there's kind of no going back with daily in the title. I'm realizing 4 weeks in. It's been a lot of fun, but I have found time for the Olympics, including fencing, which is one sport I never know when they actually score. It's very confusing to me.
I was watching the gold medal final. Korean man won. You watched that, and it was very confusing because he kept celebrating like he won over and over and over. And I think it was a Tunisian guy who kept coming back because I think it basically is if you get them, you get a point. And I guess he thought he got a point, but I found it actually pretty riveting. I'm not gonna lie. I was not just because the guy was Korean, although I was happy he won, but I have been locked in. I have been loving this Olympics, but it has not stopped me from getting ready for the NFL season and for going through the divisions. And we are now moving all the way west. I'll do the NFC West next week. You are fresh off of a camp visit. You went to Chargers camp. I'm actually going to Rams camp later today, by the way, ahead of the NFC West visit or podcast. So I figure we should start there. And I think, look, the AFC West is pretty about as lopsided as it gets in the NFL.
Okay, I heard you talking trash about it on the last podcast. It was like a blind item. You're like, I was looking at this other division that's not so great. Let's pick up the AFC West. We got some fun stuff here.
There is fun stuff. I was about to say it is a little lopsided. It's not like the NFC South where it feels like, it's anybody's game. But there are a lot of interesting changes with all these teams. We have a legitimate quarterback competition in this division, which we will get to. And I think in the Chargers, you have a team that is getting some playoff hype. A lot of that is fueled by the coaching hire. Probably should start there. I mean, you were on camp, you were on the ground. Did it feel, you've been to Chargers camp before, you live nearby. Did you feel like things were different? And I guess, gosh. Yes. Okay. So tell me, just give me the vibes report before we dive into the X's and O's.
Well, the vibes report is they have a new facility and, it's called the Bolt and it's beautiful and it's all Chargers and there's a pool and they don't even have to go downstairs to do a walkthrough because they have an outdoor patio right next to the indoor meeting rooms. And more than anything, there's just lots of fans there and it just feels very modern. And I was thinking I can't imagine Brandon Staley presiding over all this, but instead it's Jim Harbaugh and it makes sense. And for a team that's been, an afterthought in LA, I actually think it does make a difference. And he was loving life. He talked about the joy of being on that field for 2 hours a day. And you can see that he is having so much fun. And then afterwards, it's like he's a king. He's King Charger. And he's just talking to all of his subjects and he's having in-depth conversations with just random fans, getting into it for a long time, signing autographs, loving all the love. And I just thought that he has created, maybe by mistake on some level, because they were building this facility anyways, a college atmosphere in a way that you almost can't in the NFL. He runs everything.
He has a legitimate cult of personality, which is pretty rare in the NFL. It's not rare in college football. And it's in some ways why Jim Harbaugh was so well suited to coach college football. And I am optimistic. I think he's a very good coach. I think he is a good coach in ways that go beyond, he just wins, baby. He's a winner. I think that's a pretty fast, I understand that matters when we're talking about him and whether or not he will defy the track record of most college coaches who jumped. I mean, he was in the NFL. It's very different for a litany of reasons. But I also think Harbaugh, he is innovative. He is always, you saw that, by the way, watching Michigan, both on offense and defense. This is a very creative football team. You saw that in San Francisco. He has willingness to adjust and change with the times. He does not have, I would say, a defined system or style that he rigidly adheres to. I think all of that is very important. However, it makes me a little bit nervous when people are looking at him and thinking, well, he just won the national championship and the Chargers are fixed. The Chargers are not fixed. Going through this depth chart, I was once again reminded of the many holes on this team. I think there's some interesting things that'll be exciting to watch, particularly on offense, which I'm a little more optimistic about, actually. But this is a make no bones about it. I think this is a team that is, I wouldn't call them rebuilding, Greg, but I don't view them as like a surefire like playoff team the way, maybe I'm straw manning here, but it feels like some people do.
No, I agree. It's Harbaugh because if this roster had Brandon Staley as the coach, it'd be the first year in a long time that they weren't getting the hype from the hipsters. And
Yeah.
I've fallen victim to that a million times, including last year. 2022 was the only year I actually jumped off the bandwagon, which was a good year to jump off too. But last year would have been better. But Harbaugh does make you feel things, and he gets the buy-in from the players, and that's where I think it's not
Mm.
just the fans and the cult of personality where he's getting way bigger cheers than Herbert or anyone else. It's the fact that Joey Bosa, who never says anything, is like, yeah, when he says something, it's like I listen. But you do get that sense that
Incredible Joey
everyone,
Bosa impression.
yeah, that was my Joey Bosa impression. Like you do get the sense that everyone on the team believes
Expects
in it,
him, yeah.
and and the coaches believe it, and that's the thing I think he brings to the Chargers is that he is a
Yeah.
great coacher. Like he has a track record of picking the right guys and
Interesting,
developing
yeah.
them, and that's where the defense you
Well,
hope will get to that. They'll be able to develop their players in a way that takes advantage of the talent.
so that feels like a good point to talk about the Greg Roman of it all, and kind of what this offense will look like, I guess, because I think this is going to be actually one of the more interesting offenses to watch early in the season in the NFL, because potentially you could be looking at a big transformation. Some of it motivated by the coaching hires, obviously. Greg Roman, we know who he is. He is a coach who's very good and creative when it comes to calling a run game. And has struggled in the NFL, not just in Baltimore, but I would say before that to some extent with San Francisco when it comes to the passing attack. But far more than Greg Roman, it really, to me, is based on the personnel, which is very, very limiting. Now, the investment that they've made in the offensive line. So let's start there. You bring back Rashawn Slater. Hopefully, Zion Johnson plays better this year. Corey Lindsley is retired now. He was injured last year. Bradley Bozeman, who Roman knows, of course, from Baltimore, is at center. Trey Pipkins moves into right guard. He was playing right tackle competently. And then Joe Alt, who was their first round draft pick, very high draft pick. And I guess that makes Jamari Salyer, who's pretty damn good as a swing tackle. It should be a good offensive line. Even with the question mark, I would say at center, that should be a very good unit. The run game should be decent. Eckler's out, coming off of a pretty down year, obviously in pretty crappy circumstances. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, again, the Baltimore infusion. The problem, of course, is the lack of receivers. I don't even know who their top three are. Josh Palmer, healthy, is a totally decent quality, like I would say even above average NFL player. He's fine. He is
Okay,
fine.
that was good. You got there. I thought you were
If
gonna really damn him with
no, 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 no,
exceedingly
no,
faint
no.
praise. Yes.
No, he's fine. Honestly, if he was your number two, I think that would be fine in a lot of offenses. They drafted Ladd McConkey, who I loved, but and I think he can play inside outside, but he's not like a number one, right? And then you got Quentin Johnston, who appears to be having a rough continuation of a rough season. I mean, did you see anything from these receivers while you were out there, or hear anything that gave you some hope?
Yeah, that I think Palmer and McConkey are gonna be the 1 and the 2 just in terms of snaps, but DJ Chark and Quentin
Sure.
Johnson will rotate in plenty as the 3 and the 4, and they'll all play. In some 2 receiver sets, they had just Johnston out there with McConkey. It was a very Quentin Johnson practice. He caught the first 2 balls of practice. You're like, yay! And then the best throw Herbert made the whole practice, a deep ball that should have been a touchdown on a day the offense really struggled, and Johnson just dropped it. It was right out of college. So they're not counting on him, I don't think, too much. I think they look at it like their running backs can catch the ball pretty well. They're going to run 2 tight ends. Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst are going to be
Right.
on the field a lot. Donald Parham is also there. And that, look, if you have this quarterback and that good of an offensive line, and they might play Salyer at guard and Pipkins is a swing tackle, I think that's up for grabs. But man, just like, I'm a small man, as you know, Mina, and standing next to Joe Alt was just I was just like, he could just like put me in the little nook of his arm. He is a monstrous man, and that is a great
Love
tackle
a
group.
tight
So
end.
if you're
Yeah.
that good coaching up the offensive line and that good of talent on the offensive line and a quarterback like that, we've seen offenses be much better than expected with that combination. 2022 Chiefs. Not like I'm going to put that on them, but that sort of
There's
formula.
certain Patriots years that this build actually
Hmm.
kind of reminds me of too, with McConkey potentially being that Edelman-y type. You know, the years where Edelman was undoubtedly like the number one in the offense, and then it was kind of anonymous outside of him. Like that's what this could look like. And I agree with you. That's why I said I actually think the offense there's a case for some optimism because yeah, when you consider on paper stud quarterback, very good to great offensive line, coupled with, by the way, those tight ends can block. Disley
Hmm.
is a good blocking tight end, which is something that the Chargers have really lacked, I think. And then receivers who are efficient. And I'm very high on Lad McConkey catching like 20 million passes from Justin Herbert. That's an efficient, productive offense. It might not blow the doors off of anyone. It might not be super explosive and fun, but I think the best case scenario for this Chargers team is an a creative run game coupled with an efficient passing game that strings together long, annoying drives and keeps the defense off the field. And that's a realistic vision.
Right. I was wondering if it was just sort of media hype, like this team is going to just run the ball so much. But I talked to Hayden Hurst on NFL Daily and talked to some other people. I do think that is the plan. The players think it's the plan, that it's going to be a lot of running. And J.K. Dobbins looks great. I mean, that was a takeaway coming off an Achilles at the beginning of last year. I know it's just the first
Yeah.
day of padded practice, but he's their starter right now. Gus Edwards is coming off an injury, but those two guys will probably split reps. But I think they're very excited. Obviously, you got to keep Dobbins on the field, but I think physically he's maybe ahead of where they expected, and maybe you get old Herbo in the mix running the ball a little bit. Like I look back, his rookie year, number 6 in QBR rushing value. Last year, 11th. Like we don't have to say like he's an underrated athlete. Everyone knows he's a good athlete, and you're not going to turn him into even Josh Allen or anything like that. But one thing that I heard a few times there was what a big deal it was that Shane Day's quarterbacks coach is back there,
Hmm.
and that it really was. And I hadn't really thought about this, something that Herbert desperately wanted. He's been in so many different systems. And I think
Yeah.
Harbaugh just asked Herbert, like, what can I do to help you? And he's like, hire Shane Day. And they did it. And so that gives me some optimism that it could be a little closer to the rookie Justin Herbert, which maybe is still the best Justin Herbert. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to see Herbert tap into not only his running ability a little bit more, but his playmaking, which is I think kind of like the biggest criticism I've had of him over the last few years, other than sort of just being a little bit too willing to take his gains. It's part of what makes him great. He's a very careful quarterback most of the time, but like, just he's so athletic and he's so good throwing on the move, but he at times has not been willing to do so, or maybe as willing as you would hope. And a lot of that due also, I think, was injury related last year. So because he was, I was looking at his numbers just kind of to see how they compared to previous seasons, and they're pretty comparable. The only thing is you really saw a dip in QBR under pressure and outside the pocket, but I think a lot of that had to do with the injuries he was playing through even before the injury that knocked him out for the season. And I do think like you could, get a little bit more of a playmaker. Maybe he's not like pushing the ball down the field the way people would like, but you might see him creating a bit more. I guess I feel like this is a good offense for this moment with the Chargers, where they are changing their identity and rebuilding a lot of ways. Like they're changing the roster. I feel like in 2 years, Chargers, maybe even less, Chargers fans will start complaining about it and
Mm.
complaining about Greg Roman, perhaps, just because I've been on this ride before. But I think for now, for this season, it feels like the right move. It just doesn't feel like the long-term move.
I think that's a good point on Roman, that he has an expiration date, but that's always the last thing we remember about him. And you do have to give him credit for giving us two of the most exciting
Yeah.
offenses of the last 12 years. And Herbert's a different sort of quarterback at a different point in his career than Lamar was, in his first and second year. And certainly Colin Kaepernick was. But I'm giving Harbaugh the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I shouldn't have done this a day after going to that Chargers game, because now I'm
Drinking the
back in.
Kool-Aid.
I
I
might
mean,
I
I
might try to find a way to get them in as
well,
like the 7th seed or something like that.
that so that where this falls apart for me is actually not the offense, it's the defense. Because I think that I like I said, I actually think this offense has the potential to be pretty damn efficient. Uh, and I think it, like while they're obviously lacking wide receivers and even like high end tight end talent, the focus on running the ball, blocking, efficiency, all of that works. The defensive roster just is such a project. It's so right. Like they're just trying to patch holes right now. So many bad drafts from the last few years, bad signings. Tom Telesco, now the GM of the Raiders, by the way, very funny storyline. So this is a defense that was atrocious last year, bottom 5 in basically every metric on earth. I tried to find something they were good at, and I could not. They were less terrible against the run that they've been in recent years, but they made up for that by being horrible against the pass. Um, yeah, they really struggle. Sack rate was the only thing they were good at, but I think a lot of that was feasting on like Aiden O'Connell and I think there was like a game where Khalil Mack had like
Jarrett
20
Stidham, they can still
sacks.
keep doing that though. They get 4 games
Again,
against them. Yeah.
Zach Wilson had one. They had one game where they sacked him like 100 times. So anyways, they personnel wise, they bring back Mack and Bosa restructured. I mean, the pass rush is, even if Bosa and Mack have, there's some sack regression there. I do think Thule, who tailed off a little bit as the season went on, is an ascending player. They have Bud Dupree. Otherwise, like you're looking at, I mean, on the defensive line, old friend Morgan Fox, Poona Ford. On the back end, they signed Christian Fulton to play opposite Asante Samuel Jr. I guess safety is probably the strength of this team, but yeah, I mean, Derwin James coming off of probably his worst season, aside from the injuries, obviously. Alohi Gilman's a good player. Greg, I don't look at this and see much reason for thinking that they'll be significantly better than last year, aside from the change in defensive coordinator. But I don't know. Like, I think that'd be putting a little bit too much pressure on Jesse Minter.
Well, can we just get him to average? I don't think that's putting too much
Can we?
pressure on him. I think so, because again, I'm putting a lot of faith in that. Look, Mike Macdonald was there with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and so maybe it's just this Mike Macdonald halo, which has spread out to the entire league. But he was Jim Harbaugh's pick, then he was John Harbaugh's pick, and now this was Jesse Minter, who ran one of the most creative and successful defenses, just like Mike Macdonald in college, and now he's coming to this level. And I think the talent, you're right, defensive tackle is a concern. They did sign a lot of guys that I tend to like rank way too high when I do the top 100 free agents, so maybe I'm giving them a credit. Like Poona Ford, he could still have something left. Christian Fulton was a guy I was thinking, like, who is going to give him a chance, because his second year in the league, he did show a very high level of play. Hasn't been able to stay healthy, and hasn't looked great, but at least he's shown it at some point. But yeah, they're counting a lot on him. I mean, he's starting. Their linebacker position has questions. I was told a name, Dayon Henley, to keep an eye out for. They like the third round pick.
Yeah.
He might. I think he might start if Junior Colson comes back off the appendicitis. He's been out of practice, but he's coming back soon. It's him and Perryman. And so they think the three of those will be a big upgrade from what they had last year, and that Henley might have a nice season. I think the hope is that the pass rush isn't just pretty good, that it's close to the top of the league good, which is maybe hoping for too much. But if Dupree's your fourth, Rumpf is there too. What is his name? Chris Rumpf. He was having a great practice yesterday against some of the starters. Like, you're pretty deep in terms of just the edge rusher. And I think that's the hope, but hoping that Bosa stays healthy has killed Chargers coaches year after year. I can't believe he's still on this team. I want to know, like, did they decide to cut the receivers?
I know.
After the edge rushers took these pay cuts, or did they
know.
offer everyone pay cuts and the edge rushers were the one that took it? Because I'm shocked Bosa's on this team. He hasn't played more than 500 snaps or something, like, pretty much his whole career the last 4 or 5 years since he signed that contract.
When they had all of them on the field, briefly, and like you had Thule, rushing inside next to Bosa, like that was there's something there.
You do that with a little Morgan Fox sprinkled in, it's like, okay, maybe.
I mean, I guess, okay, when I think about Mike Macdonald, that defense, and I think about so when we talk about the Mike Macdonald defense, and there's an assumption Jesse Mentor's defense will look similar, maybe a little bit less split safety based on what I saw in Michigan. I don't know. It probably is going to just be dependent on how they use Derwin James. But really, generally we're talking about very high rate of simulated pressures, very high rate of disguise on the back end. And what those defenses, what that defense in Baltimore had that I think helped them do that at such high level, really, really good linebacker play. You do it all, Kyle Hamilton, edges who are super athletic. They don't have any of that. I guess the hope is you get Derwin James to be more like he was as a rookie, but it just feels like I don't mean to sound so doomer about it. I just think they clearly focused this offseason prioritizing, let's get the offensive line right. Let's protect Herbert. Let's, build this run game. Maybe not, I would say at the expense of the defense, because bringing the edges back to me felt like let's just let's keep some competent veterans out, because we're not going to draft a very highly we're not going to draft an edge very high. This is a defense in transition is, I think, the nicest thing I can say.
Yeah, and that they took the pay cut. I was surprised. Joey Bosa took a huge pay cut, and maybe he wasn't too confident in what he was going to get. The thing with Bosa is he is always still awesome when he's on the field. Khalil Mack is just a normal descending player, so he's not going to be amazing. But I look at it overall. You're right, but to me, I see average, but maybe I'm an optimist that they can be average.
I think Asante Samuel Jr. Is a player who will benefit from this change in the defense too. I'll say that. And I think with James, the rap on him was, they had him doing too much in the Staley defense. So maybe having him, I know I just said the Kyle Hamilton role, which is legitimately playing every position, but I don't think that's what's the best for him, frankly.
I don't think that's what they're going to do either. I think he's going to be just more of a regular safety.
Safety. Okay. So yeah, I guess in sum, the optimistic case for the Chargers, and I do think this is realistic, is that the offense is efficient. Herbert is protected and stays healthy. They have a dominant ground game, and Ladd McConkey is awesome. And that the defense isn't put in horrible positions where they have to defend the pass that much because of it.
And their schedule lifts them up. That's the hope. It's hard to tell before the season, but on paper, they play the NFC South. That's nice. They play the third place schedule, which has Tennessee, or last place schedule, which has Tennessee, New England, and Arizona. That's nice. And you get the Broncos and the Raiders for 4 games. I just listed 11 games. I mean,
it's true.
Against average to below average teams. So,
yeah. I mean, if you have one of the quarterbacks, and I think we both think Herbert is that guy, you're always going to be in it. I guess I'm pouring more cold water on the idea that this is a playoff team, already. I just think, let's pump the brakes a little bit. But I like that the approach that they have taken to this, focusing on the foundation and then doing the rest later. Okay. I alluded to this team, the Raiders, the quarterback competition. I feel like we have to start there. You sent me a tweet. I think it was
Sean Reed from The Athletic.
Yeah. So whenever there's quarterback competition or something legitimately where camp is important, I try to catch up on what's going on by reading just the beat reporting on it. Tashawn does a great job. Paul Gutierrez covers them for ESPN, and pretty much every report I read said the same thing, which is the defense is kicking the offense's. Sounds about right.
Right. I know.
It's a bummer though. As I was doing this, I was like, damn, if you put a good quarterback in, I actually think this offense could be pretty good.
Yeah, and
it's such a bummer.
If you had thought about maybe keeping their offensive coordinator, their interim, Bo Hardegree. I had to Google, where is Bo Hardegree right now? He is Will Levis's
Yeah.
quarterbacks coach now in Tennessee, because on a dare, well, you said you were gonna watch Aiden O'Connell.
I
You sent
did.
me a text on a
I'm
Sunday. "You wanna
ready.
watch some?" I
Ready
was
to
like, "Is
talk
that a
Aiden
dare?"
O'Connell.
I did it too, and I thought, "Hey, he's not perfect, and we can get to him, but he has some attributes." But I also thought this offense makes sense, and I hate that, okay, now you're ripping it up and you're starting, from scratch again with Luke Getsy as the coordinator.
You know what I thought watching this offense? I was like, "Damn, this offensive line is not bad."
Mhm.
I mean, that's even the reason I think when I say like, "Oh, if you could put a good quarterback in, this would be good," because obviously, first of all, Jacoby Myers is still good. I want to start that like that. I also like Trey Tucker, who
Yes.
maybe he was just awesome in the game, but
No, he had a lot of moments. He has a lot of juice. As a 3rd
he's
receiver where you're gonna play 2 tight ends a lot,
yes.
like, he's a great little player.
Well, and so they drafted Brock Bowers, who I'm a huge fan of. I think Michael Mayer had his moments. He's still kind of figuring it out as a blocker, but I think as a pass catcher, the combination of him and Bowers is really exciting. But like, yeah, it was the offensive line that jumped out to me. We were talking about the Colts game, which is a pretty damn good defensive line, and I was really impressed by. And I think it's kind of flown under the radar a little bit. Like Colton Miller is like probably one of the better left tackles in the league. They drafted JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think is going to play guard because they're keeping Andre James at center. Dylan Parham, Thayer Munford, who was decent last year in relief when Miller was out too. And when you talk about like the offense being better, I think the case for it would be, well, I thought Aiden O'Connell was okay. I just thought he played a little bit slow. So maybe the idea is like year two, he would play a little bit quicker. I don't know if that's even possible. I don't know if it matters because I still think there's kind of a ceiling on this offense with him. But yeah, it's just disappointing.
Right, and when you say slower, do you mean processing, like getting
Yeah,
through his
sorry.
reads and stuff?
So here was my takes on watching him. I think he has capable, not top of the league arm, and he will push it downfield in a way that Garoppolo wouldn't slash can't. It's easy to see why Devontae Adams would rather play with Aiden O'Connell than Jimmy
Mhm.
Garoppolo. So let's start there. That was probably the single biggest differentiating factor between the two of them. Um, I thought at times he handled pressure pretty well. I was actually like pleasantly surprised for a guy who's kind of functionally immobile. Um, and he always seemed to have a good sense of where he should be going with the football. I thought he just played a tick slow, and then he just doesn't really have like the high end. Like there weren't any throws where I was like, "Yo," like where my eyebrows were really raised. He made some good throws, and I think some like the deep outs, the harder NFL throws. But he's just not. There's just aren't those flashes of like, okay, well, if this was over the course of an entire game, he could be a top 15 quarterback. I just don't see that with him. I think he can give you average play, though. I think that's well within the realm of possibility.
Right, and he was a rookie, and I know he's,
That
I think,
yes,
turning 25 or 26 this year, so he's an older rookie. He would be one that you would expect to be a little better right off the bat, but, he should have a big second-year leap, but again, it's the new system that worries me. I thought he got rid of his, I like what you said. I agree with everything. I watched the first Kansas City game, not the one that they won, which I think got Antonio Pierce's job, where O'Connell didn't throw the ball, I think, the last 3 quarters, but the first game where they kinda jumped out to a 14-0 lead. I don't know if you remember that game, and they end up losing
yeah.
31-17, and he played, I think you said it well, that he knows where to go with the ball, especially when first reads open, like back foot, it's pretty. His numbers were solid, like, for a rookie, if you throw out his first 2 games, one he came in as a fill-in, a spot start in the middle of the year, and the other he came in halfway through the game. And then once he started the rest of the season, it was a long stretch. It was 9 games. He was 21st out of 43 qualifiers for PFF. Like he was in the middle, and he was above average in a lot of stats that rookies struggle with, which pressure to sack rate a little above average. Time to throw a little above average. Average depth of target a little better than average down the field. And so he's not as accurate or as flashy as you want, but I think he's better than Gardner Minshew long term. And I think he'll probably win the job despite all the money that they
I
gave to Minshew.
I feel like I've been so negative. This is what happens when we start the Chargers and the Raiders. I was really like, I don't want to start with the Chiefs. I want to be, give these other teams fair time. And we hear so much about the Chiefs, but unfortunately, I feel like tonally it has set the wrong direction for this podcast.
Well, you just
Raiders
said the
fans,
offensive line is great. Like,
and
and we like the skill
by
position
the way, we're
players.
gonna
There you
get to
go.
the defense. There is a lot to like about this defense, and it's kind of the reverse Chargers case where I said, I was like with the Chargers, like maybe you run the ball, you're efficient passing game, keep the defense off the field. Flip that. If the defense is awesome, your offense might not be. Maybe your offense is capable of running the ball. And I think we both expect this offense to use a ton of 12 personnel, play action pass, run the ball. Yes, okay. I do not understand why they pay Gardner Minshew all that money. It makes no sense to me. It is maybe the most befuddling decision of the offseason. The only case I can make for it is you and I are talking about the Colts game. He was okay in that game. So maybe they thought, he's decent. Was not my feeling over the course of the season. And I would be so much happier if Aiden O'Connell, who I think we agree that there's something there, and like, let's see what you got and let him compete. If he was competing with like Jacoby Brissett or somebody, I just don't see it. You get flashes of fun and playmaking. There's just not enough consistency. He puts the ball in harm's way. I would much rather see what you got in O'Connell year 2. And they're paying him so much money.
15 million guaranteed. In their defense, I think it's 2 for 25. It is kind of the amount of money, although it's way more than Jacoby got. Just that you give a guy that you don't necessarily expect to start, that it's like really high end backup or really low end starter. But the way quarterback salaries now, that if he's averaging 12 or 13, that's how they viewed it. Now I disagree too, because I think Jacoby was a better option. Minshew played his very best, I thought, after a pretty rough season. His last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, actually,
Right.
including that he was solid enough. They'll both end up starting though. Like we know they'll both end up starting. And I'm with you on the O-line. Like the metrics were like top 10ish, even, and there's a lot of continuity, which it's surprising to me. And again, the Getsy of it all worries me because I never was totally convinced by his Bears offense. He did run a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of play action. So I think you're right in terms of what we're going to see.
About the run game. So Josh Jacobs is gone. Zamir White is going to be their lead back. They brought in Alexander Madison, who was disappointing in Minnesota, but he's the backup. I will say this offensive line is a lot better at pass protection than run blocking. And I think both Jacobs and White were impacted by that, as well as defenses not really being afraid of the pass. The underlying metrics, rushing yards over expected, like White more than Jacobs. He actually averaged the same rushing yards over expected per carry as Saquon and Derrick Henry. You got to look at all these stats together. But I always like looking at that one because it does account for bad blocking, and you can see why they bet on him based on that. And I do think this could be a decent running team this season, better than they were last year. I just wish they had Michael Penix. All right, moving on.
I mean, they do too, right? You wouldn't hate that Minshew contract if he was just backing up Michael Penix.
Yes,
starting
that's
the first
the
2
thing.
games.
It's
That's
like
I think what they saw, and I think they really did see Michael Penix, and it just didn't happen.
Everything I've heard leads me to believe this team thought, and that we would be having such a different conversation. I would be very intrigued by the offense. I am intrigued by the defense. So Raiders fans, don't be mad. Because I know I left the defense out the top 10, but they were like just outside looking in. They could absolutely be a top 10 defense. I felt that way when I was doing that pod, and I maybe feel that way more now after taking a minute, watching them a little bit, looking at some of the numbers, looking at the depth chart. And it really all starts up front. This could be one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. Not just because they were very good last year, and you had role players to sort of take a step forward, like Malcolm Kuntz, for example, opposite Max Crosby. But you go out, you add Christian Wilkins, and there's 2 things I love about that. This defense was very good at rushing the passer. They weren't great against the run. And I think the combination of, like, in Wilkins and Crosby, you get two things. You have two of the more all-around defensive linemen in the NFL. I think they're both so good, both at rushing the passer, but also against the run. Crosby is, I mean, but they're both amazing, but Crosby's like development as a run defender is one of my favorite sort of subplots of this team. And then there are also two players who just don't come off the field ever.
Right.
I mean, these are like the Iron Men of the NFL. Crosby last year had the second most snaps of any edge defender. Wilkins had the most of any defensive tackle. So if you have those two guys who are both incredible against the run the pass and don't come off the field, you have good role players. Anything you get out of Tyree Wilson, whose I think injury really impacted him year one, that's really scary. And it's really easy to see this defense being very good because of it.
Yeah, that is such a sneaky attribute for a great defensive lineman. Like when JPP and Shaq Barrett were at their best in Tampa,
Yeah.
they would just eat up 900 snaps. You don't have to worry about it, and they're still that good. The most surprising moment of the Hard Knocks Giants season to me was the moment where their front office was like, well, Wilkins is not much, they were talking about Christian Wilkins, not much of a pass rusher. And I'm like, I know he's not going to be like on the edge, like getting a bunch of bend the edge sacks, but he's pushing that pocket, and he's always faced double teams. I still think he will, because he's going to be on the inside, and that's just harder, but it's not going to be all the time. And Crosby's going to get set up, and Kuntz is certainly going to get set up. And yeah, those guys are going to eat. Crosby is so good. He reached the level that very few players on defense have ever reached, which is he just got a raise from the Raiders for nothing. Like, he had just signed his other contract. We didn't even hear anything about a contract. All they did, they just added $5 million to his salary this year out of nowhere. And it was just like, you're that good, I'm just going to give you more money. And not
he
even,
also like
crazy.
Is clear, like, it's so rare that like an edge is the face of the team, and he's just clearly the face of the team. Yeah. I mean, Antonio Pierce is arguably the head coach because of Matt Crosby. I think the Chiefs game, and obviously what we saw at the end of the season. I really, really, really like this defensive line. Question marks behind them, which is ultimately why I kept them out of the top 10. But I think, you and I talked about Jack Jones being a key player on this team. I think if he sustains that level of play, you're really only worrying about one cornerback spot. I know Jacorian Bennett had a rough rookie season, but he could take a leap year two. I know it's a bit of a competition. Safety's pretty solid. Linebackers, not that bad. Spillane was good for this. So I think my biggest thing about the Raiders defense is just it's a little thin at some of these positions. But if the starters play and they're healthy, this could be one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, there's proof of concept that they just play fast, and it's such a cop out, but you know it when you see it with defenses, that you can make up a lot in defense in terms of talent and cohesiveness and effort. And it's what got Pierce the job, that blowout against the Chargers, the Chiefs, that they just play with their hair on fire. They play like Max Crosby, and he's taken guys who were not as good under other coaches and helped them be better. Like Robert Spillane was much better with him. Jack Jones was up and down in New England, and he gets it going. Malcolm Kuntz has been there a handful of years. Even Morig, in the secondary was better with him. So do you want my like overarching Raiders optimistic take? They, to me, are like the number one team that if I was an irrational fan, I actually get where the irrational fans are coming from here. That because they're probably on that list that we would make of like, there's only about 4 or 5 teams in the AFC that you just don't expect to make the playoffs. And I think with the skill position and the offensive line and Pierce's defense, if you're an irrational fan, I at least can see where they're coming from. And Raiders fans are always irrational, but I actually think they have something here that like, wow, 6.5 as their over under. I think it's fair to see it like a 1 in 5 chance here that like they just have another magical season with Pierce, and it goes a lot better. I think they have a chance at least.
I think if they had drafted Penix, this would be one of the buzziest teams of the offseason.
That's fair.
Excited to watch defense. All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and talk about, I guess, what we could call another quarterback competition. Let's get to it. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer: hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. So we're back, and we're, of course, talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. No, I'm just kidding. The Broncos quarterback competition. Is it one? Let's discuss. Bo Nix, they drafted 12th overall. Jarrett Stidham, the aforementioned Jarrett Stidham, is in the room. So is Zach Wilson. Similarly to sort of with the Raiders, I've been trying to get a feel for camp, trying to put my finger on the pulse of Broncos country. Gregg, I imagine you're doing the same. You're with your daily podcast, which, by the way, people, is excellent. You should go subscribe every day. And you don't have to subscribe every day, just listen every day, but you have to subscribe once. What are you hearing about the Broncos? Let's start with the Broncos offense.
Well, they changed the rotation on Tuesday of the quarterbacks with the first team. It should have been Zach Wilson's day. Instead, it was Jarrett Stidham. So Sean Payton had been hinting about this, that we're not going to do this forever. And to me, it's a two-person battle, at least now. I think it's going to be Nix and Stidham. And I think Stidham, as we record in late July, has a better chance than consensus believes of getting the week 1 start. Because I think it's just that he has a chance if Nix doesn't show out enough. I think they like Stidham enough that he could be there for a few weeks, but
Seahawks.
More likely than not, it's going to be Nix. What?
On my birthday.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for that week 1. I'm buying all the Seahawks hype, and this Broncos team is just such a mystery bag. I'm into it.
It's a good start for us. Yeah, I mean, I've been really just thinking about it being Nix.
I'm going to go 75-25, but I just think the 25 for Stidham is higher than maybe people think.
Well, it could also just be Stidham. They sacrifice him at the beginning of the season, and then they make a change. I've been thinking a lot about Sean Payton, watching the what you talked about in Los Angeles, Jim Harbaugh just loving life, just being celebrated, thinking, man, if I had held out a year, I could be coaching Justin Herbert. I guess that's I bring that up not to be mean. I guess it is a little mean. Sorry, Broncos fans. But rather, I think one of the more interesting storylines that I don't feel like I have a good handle on is whether or not Sean Payton wanted Bo Nix, whether he really truly likes his skill set. I don't think it's clear. I know people are kind of rolling their eyes a little bit. I don't think he looks at him and sees Drew Brees. He's not an idiot. He's very, very smart. Well, that's not even... I'm not even saying that to imply that Bo Nix can't be successful in the NFL. Just very different quarterbacks with very different skill sets. I have watched a lot of Bo Nix. I watched a lot of Drew Brees. They are not similar. I guess Nix is accurate, but it's just different quarterback. The offense will be different too. I think that, and I guess that's what I really want to dig into rather than Sean Payton's psychology, more so Sean Payton as the offensive mind.
Can I say one thing about Sean Payton's psychology, though?
Yeah.
His first press conference, someone told me to go back and watch this. He was acting in his first press conference at training camp like they had just come off the field and they had just lost the game 41-7. He was so snappy and short and...
Wait, last year. You're talking about last year.
This year, to start training camp.
This year.
And it just didn't look like a guy to the opposite of Jim Harbaugh, who's all joy and happy.
Yeah.
I don't want to get inside of his head, but he was giving me Parcells late, and everyone thinks of Belichick as a Parcells disciple. Sean Payton is the true Parcells disciple that's ever made. It was giving me Parcells late in Dallas vibes when he was just maybe not all the way in, or even Parcells in Miami as an executive, or Mike Holmgren late in his career vibes of just like, I don't know. He didn't seem that happy to be there. I know that seems unfair, but I was just like, what is going on here? It's the first day of training camp and you're just like mad at the world. Come on.
Well, that doesn't bode well for the discussion we're about to have about the offense. Yeah. Okay. So I think when we did the X Factors, I wasn't allowed to choose coach, but Payton is to me because I think he's been over the course of his career an extremely creative play caller who has done a very good job of reshaping his offense with around different quarterbacks. I think it was very obvious last year he had zero belief in Russell Wilson as a quarterback based on the offense that they called. So what I want to see is if you did pick Knicks, what's the vision here? What does this look like? And it's more than just like, because I just feel like the Drew Brees comp is lazy because, people say they think about late career Brees, maybe not the biggest arm, but he's accurate and smart. And you hear those adjectives used to describe Bo Nix. But if you're not, in my opinion, if you're not putting Bo Nix on the move, you're not tapping into his skill set properly. And to be clear, I do think Sean Payton has a certainly better understanding of me, of his quarterback. I'm just interested in seeing what this looks like. Nix, I did not view him as being a first round quarterback personally, but I do think he has very clear strengths that Peyton can tap into. Throwing on the move is one of them. The ball comes out super quick with him. I do think, his intelligence and experience do matter. I think he is good at reading defenses. I think he is a great RPO quarterback. I think all of those things you can build like a functional NFL offense around. I'm just excited to see. I'm interested in seeing it actually, because I just think it's going to look very, very different from what we saw last
Mm,
year.
I agree. And for everything I just said about Peyton, I mean, he finds a way to get efficient offense out of anyone. Like his post Breeze career, I think is underrated in that every quarterback, and there's been so many different flavors and styles, like they all end up providing efficient passing game. Even the Russ offense was fairly efficient. It really
Yeah.
wasn't like a bad passing game last year. Now they threw a ton to running backs. They threw the ball short. Like it was not an aggressive offense, especially considering Russell Wilson was the quarterback. And that could suit Bo Nix. He was just such a tough evaluation that he feels like a quarterback that might be as good as the coach and the skill players around him. And he's got the coach, but I don't think he has the skill players really.
That's where I get a little bit nervous because when I think I had Daniel Jeremiah on to talk about the quarterbacks, and at the time I said I would really like to see him in a Dolphin style offense, because if you have a quarterback who doesn't have like the super strong arm but is very good at getting the ball out super quickly and accurately, it seems like a pretty good translation of skill sets. The problem is like that's just a very different group of skill players. Sutton is still a great contested catch guy. Josh Reynolds is competent. Mims gives you a little bit of juice. Patrick's coming off the injury. Troy Franklin, I thought that was bizarre how he fell in the draft. But you're going to have to build something very different from Miami with those players because they're just so different. And I think, if the idea is like, okay, let's do a vertical, like let's push the ball using RPOs. Let's run the ball. I think that's going to be a pretty big focus of this offense. There's good players. There's just nobody who like really puts the fear of God in you.
No, even Sutton isn't a guy that gets like a ton of separation, and you would want him with a guy like Russell Wilson who can throw it deep, and maybe Bo Nix, who was efficient enough. That's why he was hard to evaluate. You just didn't see those throws enough, but kind of like a late career Drew Brees, if you wanted to give him comparison, like he was efficient at doing it when he did throw deep, and maybe the connection with Franklin would help. And more than anything, I think they're really hoping that the offensive line is an asset. I know they lost Lloyd Cushenberry, their center. Before the five are back, I was surprised when he hired Zach Strief, the former Saints player, as his offensive line coach. And I think he did about as good a job as any offensive line coach in the league. I did not expect that team to be ranking high in pass rush win rate and the PFF stats and everything. And they were really solid. And Peyton invests in the offensive line. They just gave Quinn Miners, their guard, a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's always been a big part of the Sean Payton recipe, is he has always had really smart, dependable, good offensive lines. I think if you're trying to be optimistic, that's the strength of this team. I remember before last season, Broncos fans got mad at me
Well,
saying, like, what position group is above average on this team? There literally isn't one single position group. I would say that's still true, except the offensive line. Now I think you'd
and
say the offensive line is above average.
and the offensive line is probably going to look better this year because they have a quarterback who gets rid of the ball quickly. I think Russell Wilson has probably if not Justin Fields or him, longest time to throw in the NFL last year. I don't even have to look it up. I know that, like, I would be shocked if that's not the case. That is going to dramatically change with Bo Nix. It is I maintain his greatest strength as a quarterback is how quickly that ball comes out. And I think that the offensive line could really, really benefit from playing with him. And I keep going back to, I think this is going to be a very heavy RPO offense. And I think the run game will benefit from that too. So it's not like the Chargers because, that a lot of that is sort of what we talked about. They're being efficient. That offense being efficient is predicated on the quarterback being a playmaker. But I do think quarterback gets the ball out quickly and accurately, strong RPO vertical game based off of that offensive line that we both agree is pretty good and will benefit from playing with the quarterback who gets the ball out quickly. Could be efficient. Could be efficient. Defense. Oof. Okay. Last year, I did a lot on this last year. They were obviously a train wreck at the beginning. About midseason, there was something of a turnaround. I don't think they were playing at a super high level. The first half of the season, they were 32nd EPA per play, 32nd success rate, 32nd QBR. A lot of that, of course, not a lot of it was the Dolphins game, but they were bad throughout. Second half, 13th in QBR, 16th in EPA per play, 20th in success rate. They did benefit from, like turnovers and things like that, but I actually think they did play better. They figured out who their starting lineup was. Guys were being moved around constantly. It was very much in transition. You return a lot of the same starting cast, although at safety, obviously you're different. Justin Simmons remains befuddlingly still out there. You added, this one flew under the radar. I actually did not notice this during the draft. Did you know they traded for John Franklin Myers? I missed that.
Yeah.
He's a good player.
That was a sneaky date. That was like day 3. You were, who knows what they had you doing on the ESPN set at that point. But yeah, that was a good pickup. He's kind
Good
of
player.
a good complementary player to Zach Allen, I think, on the defensive line.
Who do you think is the best player on this defense not named Patrick Surtain?
Zach Allen, still.
Yeah.
I think he was still. I don't know if Broncos fans are unhappy or happy with him, but he was more or less the same guy, which is he's going to beat his man. He's going to create pressure. He's going to be a guy that if you don't double team him, creates problems that you can put all over the field. He's a good above average starting versatile player. I don't know if you can say that about too many other guys on this defense. They have a bunch of edge rushers that on their own, I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of like him. Like Jonathan Cooper can do something. Nick Bodino maybe, but Baron Browning is definitely fun. But they were 31st in DVOA when rushing 4 last year, and so add it all up, and it's not enough.
Yeah, Jaquan McMillan, if he can get better in coverage, I think he's such a fun player. He's so good at finding the football. And
if you base it on like 3 games, if you only watched his 3 best games, he was like an all pro. And then I realized, okay, he struggled in some other ones. But.
I agree with you about the edges. It's all like kind of a bunch of incompletes. Benito's like probably I'm sure he has the highest pressure rate and whatnot of all of them, but he can't defend the run. Browning is the one I think has the most upside personally. There were moments where he looked like a true edge one type player. He was the guy who you remember, of course, they played off the ball earlier in his career, coming from college, and then sort of moved him to being a full-time pass rusher. And I think maybe with a full off season, he could really flourish next year. It's just there's just holes. Linebacker Josie Jewell's gone. They bring in Cody Barton. Defensive tackle, we like Allen. DJ Jones is pretty rough. Cornerback, non-Surtain. This is a bad defense. Just a bad defense. Like it's just.
I would hate it though if I was an NFL player and a big fan of the Mina show featuring Lenny. Like I'm listening to all 8 division previews, waiting for my position group to come up, and then you're just like, DJ Jones, he's pretty rough, and just like his heart, his big heart is breaking somewhere. He's a huge fan.
I met him actually. I met him at the Super Bowl when the Niners played the Dolphins in Miami. Wait,
Okay.
that was Miami, right? That Super Bowl, yeah.
Yes.
No, wait, not the Dolphins. I'm sorry, I was confusing it. It was when the Niners played the Chiefs in Miami. I met him, and he was lovely. So I feel bad saying that.
Or if you don't even get mentioned, you mentioned the linebackers being kind of rough, and yeah, that's a big concern for me.
Alex
That's we
Singleton's like, what?
yes.
Say my name. Say my name. Okay. Let's just wrap here. What does success for the Broncos in 2024 look like? I think it's worth taking a moment.
Bo Nix being
Yeah.
efficient, making that pick look smart, and they managed to win 8 games, and Sean Payton does not want to. It's funny because if they won 8 games, I think everyone would say they're overachieving. He's probably not going to be that happy, but I would say that would be a success. Bo Nix being good and winning 8 games.
Yeah. I think of like Tua the year before Mike McDaniel when they did kind of get somewhere with that vertical RPO game. I could see something similar like that in terms of efficiency. Okay. And then, they can work on improving the talent around him thereafter. Finally, the Chiefs. All right. Big bad. We're here. Let's start with the offense. We're done. Let's start with the offense on all these teams. The biggest question mark. Actually, I think there's a couple of questions. The biggest question mark is left tackle. We are hearing that Kingsley Suamataia, I think I say his name right. I'm working on that. Has been taking reps as the starter. We'll see how that goes over the course of camp. He's competing with Wanya Morris, who played a little bit last year when Donovan Smith was out. I was saying this. Playing tackle for the Chiefs is really fascinating because it's harder and easier at the same time, right? Like it's hard. I mean, and I'm not talking about last year Smith and Taylor had all the penalties. That's its own thing. But I mean, just in terms of pass protecting for Mahomes, it's hard because he holds onto the ball and plays extend and whatnot. It's easy because he does not take sacks. I mean, I was just wanted to see this. Over the last 4 years, this is where Mahomes is ranked in pressure to sack rate. Second, first, second, first. Trading places with Josh Allen, who doesn't take sacks because he is, a human transformer. Mahomes doesn't take sacks because he has amazing feel and steps up in the pocket, and then he plays behind one of the best interior offensive lines in football. So while I see this being a question mark, and obviously we're all haunted by the Tampa Bay Super Bowl, I don't think it's a huge deal, and I think it's a good thing that he's playing already and that they view him as a potential starter.
Yeah, if one offensive line spot is a problem, you're good. Like you can cover that up. You can help with the chip block and tight ends. And I'm very confident in the rest. You mentioned the best interior line in the NFL. I think right tackle. I know Taylor had all those penalties, but he kind of cleaned that up halfway through the year. And ultimately, he's a good pass protector. And the NFL agrees with you that it's I guess easy and hard to play left tackle because Donovan Smith, who was starting in that Super Bowl in front of us, is still unsigned somewhere, and maybe he joins this team too. That feels like it's a possibility if Suamataia doesn't play well in the preseason or look great in camp, because it does seem like they're giving him this job. But yeah, Mahomes has such weird stats. I saw one that no quarterback in 7 years held the ball as long as he held it and threw the ball as short as he threw it. Which if you had told me that about Patrick Mahomes in 2018, I would be like, there's no way Patrick Mahomes would have that stat because of the second part of it. And that's one of the stories of camp that they're trying to get away from that.
Well, I think that's the other thing that's going to be interesting is you go out, you sign Hollywood Brown, you draft Xavier Worthy. Obviously, that leads you to believe this offense is going to be attacking downfield, right? But I think last year, what people forget, it wasn't just drops that doomed the downfield passing attack. It was bad route running, wide receivers getting beat by cornerbacks in the air. So I think it's one thing to just, put speed on the team. It's another to see that those two receivers come down with the football, and that Patrick Mahomes develops a sort of rapport with them that'll have him taking risks instead of taking his gains underneath. And I think they can. I'm pretty confident in both those players. I'm also confident in the fact that if both those players are on the field, Patrick Mahomes will be content to throw it to Travis Kelce or Rashee Rice underneath. I'm going to be interested in seeing which personnel groupings this team faces in this year. Last year, they were, of course, last 2 years, very heavy, 12 and 13. They were much better throwing the ball out of 12 and 13 personnel. 0.11 EPA per play with multiple tight ends versus 0.01 throwing with 3 receivers. The thought is, well, you have these better receivers now. You're going to come out and go Rice, Worthy, Brown. I'm not so sure about that, man. I think this team is still going to come out with multiple tight ends on the field, especially because some of those tight ends are healthier and they actually added to the group.
Right, they drafted
Jared Wiley.
Middle round, Jared Wiley.
I know him because I drafted him in Dynasty. And
nice. Well, he's the future Noah Gray. Or no, maybe not. Like, they love Noah Gray.
Noah Gray's back, yeah.
Chiefs fans, Chiefs team, like they want Noah Gray on the field. I do think, though, the whole deep ball thing, they've telegraphed it. Andy Reid talked about it in May. Anyone that's been on training camp there, Pete Sweeney does a great job for Arrowhead Pride covering them and just saying, like, it's every day that he's going deep, deep, deep. And Marquise Brown is a good NFL receiver. He has some shortcomings, and him and Worthy have to stay on the field. But I'm high on Xavier Worthy. I think he's a much better route runner than he was given credit for. He was a true one in college on a team with A.D. Mitchell, and I think he can get open enough. They just need to stay healthy. Brown has shortcomings, but to me he's a top 50 NFL receiver. Like, that is miles above where they've been. And one thing I think hasn't gotten a lot of attention is Rashee Rice hasn't been suspended yet. And
I was trying to figure out what's going on with that before.
So I've asked, and I don't think anyone really knows, but I think the Chiefs and just conventional wisdom says there's a lot of hope that he's not going to get suspended until the legal situation sorts itself out, which might not be till next season. So that was just assumed all along. We've seen the PD suspensions. Usually with legal stuff, they do it coming into training camp. There's no hard and fast rule, but I think there's some hope that it's going to wait till the courts play out. And so actually he could be on the field the whole season.
Well, yeah, the whole season is a big deal, especially because I do,
or half the season, and then it happens halfway through, which would be disastrous. But I don't think that's not usually how the NFL would
handle it that way. Yeah. Personally, yeah. Yeah, I think it's this was an offense that actually finished 8th in passing DVOA despite the all of the drama last year. Even if one of these players doesn't live up to the, all these additions and guys coming back, and maybe Kelce's kind of like last year, he doesn't play as much earlier on and whatever. I think right now there's enough depth to where I don't really care. I'm not really concerned about it. It's funny, right? Because this group, Rice, Worthy, Brown, we'll see what happens with Sky Moore, Tony, Justin Watson. There's no real normal number one tight route runner. Like, they don't, I was thinking,
but they're all very different, which is, I know some coaches love that, like the old different Kyle Shanahan Falcons, that there are all these different flavors you got to cover like a basketball team. So that's in their favor.
Well, I mean, in you have guys who stretch the field this way, and then Rice, you have a guy who stretches the field this way. It's, just math and space. And it is, I think, like Rice's emergence in the second half of the season, once they figured out how basically they just would spam crossing routes with him, I think was pretty significant. And then when you consider the fact that, now that you have these other guys who are actually stressing the field and making it harder to play man coverage against this team, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the return of them facing a lot of too high, as they did at the end of the Tyreek Hill era, which Patrick Mahomes already knows how to beat. So, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I mean, before we get to the defense really quickly, I guess, what is the case against this offense? If you're one of the teams, if you're a fan of one of these other teams, or frankly any team in the NFL, what is the haters' case against the Chiefs offense?
Okay, I'm only doing this as a thought exercise because I
You were
do
doing
think
it.
I think their offense is gonna be better, and I think their defense is gonna be worse. So, but the haters case, the left tackle situation is a real situation, which there's every reason to believe right now it would be. This is, a raw late second round pick who
Right.
is not viewed as a top 6 or 7 guy. So that being a real issue, that Brown and or Worthy don't really stay healthy because they get a hamstring, whatever it is, they can't stay on the field. And then I hate to say it, that Travis Kelce actually stays old the whole season instead of just for like 6 games at a time. Because at times he has looked older, and then suddenly the playoffs show up, and he's the greatest,
They're
tight end
gonna
we've
they're
ever seen.
gonna they're gonna LeBron him for sure. They clearly were doing that last year. It was kind of, I think it was Bill Barnwell maybe who really noticed this. Like, he was like, this feels deliberate, right? Great, like they're
Mm.
load managing him, and they're gonna do it again. I
Or he
would do it.
somehow like load manages himself, like
Yeah, that's
old NBA teams
LeBron.
used to do, where you're on the field, but I'm not going to really crank it up till it matters. I buy it.
All right. I actually think the haters' case is the defense, even though I still think they're going to be very good. But I do think we are leaning a little too hard on Steve Spagnuolo can turn any cornerback into a stud. Now, that's not to say I think this group isn't good. I think they're good. I've just been a little skeptical of the idea that you can take L'Jarius Sneed out of this defense and everything's going to be fine. Because not just because of how good he was last year, but because of the specific role that he played shutting down number one wide receivers and traveling with them. That's just not. I am a massive Trent McDuffie fan. UW. I go back, check my record. I loved him in college. I loved him coming out of college. I believe he is best in the slot. I think he can play very well. So we've seen him play well outside. I just don't love the idea of him slotting into that role. Now, Steve Spagnuolo is incredibly smart. He's much smarter than me. I don't think he's going to have him play the exact same way. I think we will see some evolution of this defense. I just think that's a pretty significant loss, and maybe people are overlooking that.
Right. And I still, even though I know he's been outside at camp, I kind of think that's for when they're maybe only have two cornerbacks on the field, because even if he's not as good on the outside, he's still better on the outside than the other guys that they have. So if you have Shamari Connor, who is another one of these guys out of the Chiefs factory, who is a safety, but they'll play him at nickel and they love him, and he flashed late last season.
Yeah.
And Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams both played quite a lot for this team. They do manage to find production. So Justin Reed to me is very underrated and just such a big part of the secondary. And he's been around there for a while. So it's not like they don't have pieces, but there is this thing with Chiefs fans now that they just assume they have an elite defense. And I do just want to read their DVOA in the full regular seasons before last year. 14th, 22nd, 16th. Now they had a great trend of always playing their best at the end of the season when they needed to, except for in the Super Bowl against the Eagles, where they absolutely could have lost the game for them. But it's not like it's been a shutdown, amazing defense year
Yeah.
after year. So I think it's absolutely fair to expect a decline. It's just whether that decline is from like from second to sixth or
Yeah.
seventh, or they're more in the middle of the pack. And then this team, is a little more vulnerable.
They were third in EPA per play when they played man coverage. They played amongst the most man coverage in the NFL. Again, one would think they might not be as good without Sneed at that. And they were extremely good rushing the passer. Now, that I do think is likely to continue, not just because you retain Chris Jones, although he's getting up in the years and has played a ton of football. But I thought Karlaftis took a real step forward last season. That could continue. Omenahu was injured. We'll see when he comes back. If you get something out of Felix Anudike Uzama this year, who barely played, that would be huge. And then they like kind of kept everyone on the defensive line. I actually, when I was looking at the depth chart, I was surprised to see all of the names. I don't know why. I just thought, probably one of these guys who were so great in the Super Bowl will be gone. No, Dana, Nadi, Pinnell, they're still all there. Linebacker group, you lose Willie Gay Jr., but this is still one of the better linebacking groups in the NFL. Bolton, Tranquil, and Chenal, who was awesome in the Super Bowl, right? I think one thing I could see happening, Greg, is I could see this defense being a little bit worse against the pass and a little bit better against the run this season.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think they're more likely to decline to just lower in the top 10 because they have more talent. They're better at rushing they really addressed rushing the passer. And Amenahu might not be back, who knows, until like at full strength until the middle of the season or something, but that's a great mid-season addition. And I love that linebacker group. Tranquil was so underrated for them last year, and
Yeah.
now he's going to play weak side full time, which I think suits him well next to Bolton and Chenault. Like, they can do everything, and they're great on special teams. I know you don't hit the special teams too much, but it's like they have one of the best special teams coaches.
Well,
They have a very effective, if annoying, kicker, and they have Worthy maybe doing the returns and
Justin Reed might kick.
Right. I just think like they get a big edge there too, and they're one of the teams I would most expect to somehow take advantage of the kickoff rules because they've got about 7 decent options to return kicks. They're going to get funky, and so it's really hard to pick against this team like on a global level.
Justin Reed taking kickoffs because the kicker might have to tackle more would be the equivalent of the merry-go-round play of special teams where they're just like stunting on the NFL. Like, we're just going to do this because we can. I would love it. I want to say one thing too about the run defense, by the way, before we just wrap here with the defense. They were bad during the regular season, but they kind of tightened things up in the Super Bowl. You know, I've gone back and watched the Ravens drives a lot to try to understand the running the ball stuff, and the Chiefs were dominating them up front, which I think is a big part of the reason why they gave up. Now, again, you can quibble with there's a few plays where you're like, yeah, you probably should have handed it off, whatever. But I do think in both that game and then against the Niners as well, they looked better than they did during the regular season.
It's got to get lost to history that's one of the best runs any defense has ever had. It's one of the best runs any team has ever had. By DVOA, it really was the best run of teams that any team beat in a 4-game stretch in any playoff run. And it was not mostly the defense, but it was the defense leading the way. I mean, the Chiefs offense had 10 points through 9 possessions of the Super Bowl. Right. That thing could have been over. And the defense, like, they'll never be forgotten for that. And somehow this team seems like it'll be better this year.
All right. So I think we agree the Chiefs are number 1 in the division, but where do we have these teams after that? It's tricky.
I'll go Chargers, Raiders, Broncos. I wanna see a fun season out of the Raiders. I think because of the schedule that I mentioned.
I know you kind of got me thinking
I
Raiders
think for the Raiders too. I think there could be some I'd like the over for the Raiders and the Chargers.
Wow. I think that's right. Chargers Raiders is the hardest kind of head to head for me there. I think the Raiders could have the best unit of those two teams with their defense, but it's really hard to bet against Harbaugh and Herbert. After I started this podcast being like, it's so facile to say Jim Harbaugh just wins. Facile. Yeah, no, that seems right. Excited to see who wins these two quarterback competitions. I kept calling them that. As always, you can probably keep up with that by listening to Gregg's excellent, I know I said as always, but you can keep up to it by listening to Gregg's excellent podcast, NFL Daily. Hopefully I'll get invited back on sometime soon.
Name the date.
I want to tease something. We will be back next week. So power hours are done, but we are sticking to the 2-a-week schedule. Back on Monday with a very exciting special guest and maybe like a little bit of an announcement on that front. So I'm excited about that. And then the NFC West, you can check this podcast out on TV on ESPN News on Wednesday afternoon. DVR it wherever you can. You can also watch it on YouTube at youtube.com/@MinaKimes. Thank you so much to the folks at Omaha Productions, Kirsten Sebecki, Jack Foster, Kevin Mattice, Owen Saylor, Tucker Tastian, Charlie Kravitz at YouTube. And I will see you guys next week.